My beloved child, there is a burden you have been carrying that you have never truly named. You move through life with the sense that you must always be enough, always steady, never allowing even the smallest crack to show. You have learned to tighten your inner world, to conceal the fragile places, because you fear that if you loosen your grip even slightly, everything will slip out of control. You set standards for yourself so high that each passing day becomes an internal audit. And when you fail to reach them, you do not blame circumstances. You turn the blade inward, against yourself. You do not speak it aloud. But there is a quiet question that echoes constantly within you. Am I enough? That question follows you into every decision, every relationship. Even when outwardly you appear calm, it is not loud, but it clings, refusing to let go. You call it discipline. I call it the fear of being cast out of safety. You are afraid that if you slow down on the inside, the door of opportunity will close. You believe that good things come only to those who are strong, decisive, and never hesitant. You fear that if you allow yourself to be weak, the entire structure you are holding together will collapse. But I want to ask you something you rarely dare to face. Who placed on your shoulders the obligation to always be unshakable? Who taught you that your worth lies in never being wrong, never being tired, never faltering? It was not I. I did not tell you that you must strain yourself to be allowed to remain. I did not say you must be perfect to be kept. I did not say that softness is failure. Those voices did not come from me, even though you have heard them for so long that they now seem like unquestionable truth. So you keep moving forward, even when you are already weary inside. You are used to saying, "I'm fine," so you do not have to explain further. While the cracks quietly spread, you hold everything tightly, not because you still have strength, but because you are afraid that if you let go, everything will shatter. You believe that if you endure just a little longer, peace will arrive as a reward for your endurance. But my child, peace is not something you must purchase with exhaustion. Peace is the foundation I have already laid, so that you can stand without fear of collapse, even when you have not yet proven anything at all. You call the slow spaces in your life delay. You call unopened doors failure. You call my silence absence. But I call these things by another name. I call them protection. There are things you ask for sincerely, but your heart is not yet wide enough to carry them without being distorted by fear. There are roles you long for, but if I were to give them while you are still trembling with comparison, you would lose yourself inside what I give. I do not delay because I forget. I hold back because I love. I would rather let you think you are slow than allow you to break when what you asked for comes too soon. I am not bound by time as you are. You live minute by minute. I see the whole journey. I see you before you see yourself. I see what is forming within you. Even when all you see is fatigue and confusion, you think nothing is happening. But I am working where you cannot see. I am separating from you motives that do not belong to life. I am emptying you of pressures you have carried on behalf of others. I am teaching you to stand without needing to prove anything. And these lessons cannot be learned while you are still running. There are nights when you lie there, eyes closed while your mind refuses to sleep. You replay old decisions, missed opportunities, moments when you wish you had been just a little faster. You ask me, what if I had chosen differently then? What if I had been stronger? What if I had not hesitated? You think these questions are harmless thoughts, but I see them slowly draining life from you. They do not lead you forward. They bind you to a past where I no longer keep you. I do not look at your life through what ifs. I look at it through what I am doing now. Even in the slowness you resent, you are not late in my hands. You are simply in a stretch where I am making you ready so you will not break when you step into what you asked for. I am not waiting for you to be perfect. I am waiting for you to be real enough not to run out of fear, real enough not to live by others' eyes, real enough to receive without clenching, real enough to stay when I say stay. And when that readiness takes shape, you will not need anyone to tell you it is time. You will know not by excitement, but by a deep, steady quiet within. I see how you try to explain your slowness to others, and then to yourself. You say you are preparing, yet inwardly you fear you are only standing still. You say you trust me, but when night comes, you still wonder whether I remember you. You do not doubt me with words, you doubt me with the tension behind every small decision. You do not dare to rest fully, because you fear rest will make you later still. You do not dare to step fully, because you fear stepping wrong. And so you hover between these two fears, calling it waiting, while I see it as exhaustion. You think readiness is the moment you stop trembling. You think it is when you have enough answers, enough resources, enough confidence that nothing can shake you. But I do not call such people ready. I call them controlling. Readiness is not the absence of fear. Readiness is refusing to let fear lead. There are doors that, if opened while you are still trying to prove yourself, will become burdens. There are roles that, if given while you are still comparing, will consume you. I am not delaying what you ask for. I am lightening what you carry so you can receive without breaking. You have grown used to seeing those who arrive before you as evidence that you are late. You do not see the years they wandered, the nights they lost sleep, the parts of themselves they had to let go of to stand where they are. You see only the outcome, then turn it into a whip for your own back. I do not build your life by rankings. I do not ask you to run on someone else's road and call that faithfulness. Every path I mark has its own rhythm, and that rhythm does not need comparison to be right. When you force your pace to match another's, you do not become faster, you only move farther from me. There are things I am removing from you that you call loss. In truth, they are the very things that would turn against you when greater things arrive. I am thinning the quiet pride hidden behind the word self-reliance. I am loosening your habit of rescuing yourself before you ask me. I am teaching you how to live without an audience, so that when you are entrusted with what is public, you do not live for applause. These works are not loud. They happen in ordinary days, in small choices that only you and I see. You ask why I do not give you a clear sign. You want a marker, a deadline, a promise with a date attached. But if I gave you dates while your heart was still dependent, you would turn those dates into whips, pressing yourself, then condemning yourself when you fall short. I do not want you to step into what I give by the lash of clocks and pressure. I want you to step in with an inner life that has learned how to remain. For what I am preparing for you does not need speed to be sustained. It needs endurance. It does not need explosion. It needs faithfulness. You do not see many changes on the outside, so you conclude that nothing has changed within. But you do not realize that the most important changes make no noise. Roots do not announce themselves when they grow. Foundations do not boast when they dry. Readiness does not perform, it accumulates. One day you realize you no longer react the way you once did. One day you do not panic when plans shift. One day you can say not yet without despising yourself. Those days are never marked, yet they are quietly rewriting who you are. I do not ask you to understand everything. I ask you not to bend yourself to keep pace with a rhythm I never set. When I tell you to stay, it is not a suspended sentence. It is an invitation to learn how to stand firm when there is nothing to hold on to. And when you can stand like that, I will not need to pull you forward. You will walk not out of fear of being late, but because you are ready to carry what is waiting ahead, not by the strength of running, but by steadiness within. If you look back, you will see that I have never abandoned you where you are standing. I led you here intentionally not to trap you, but to change how you carry yourself. When the way you carry yourself changes, everything you are waiting for will arrive differently, not rushed, not forced, not breaking you. And when that day comes, you will understand that this slowness has taken nothing from you. It has saved you from receiving too early something you are not yet able to hold. There are mornings when you wake up not knowing how to name your inner state. Not quite despair, but not lightness either. You do familiar tasks, speak familiar words, yet inside there is a suspended space. You fear that space because it does not give you the feeling of moving forward. You have grown used to measuring your life by motion. So when everything slows, you think I have withdrawn my hand. But you do not know that in those suspended spaces, I am removing old habits from you, ways of responding that helped you survive, but did not help you live. You once believed that if you tried a little harder, everything would open. You thought effort was the key to every door. I do not deny your faithfulness, but I do not want you to carry the illusion that everything opens by force. There are doors that open only when your hands are no longer clenched. There are paths that appear only when you stop pushing yourself forward. I am teaching you the difference between striving and trusting, two things that look alike from the outside, yet lead you to very different places. You call these days meaningless because they produce no visible results. You want to see progress so you can feel secure, but you do not see that the fact you no longer have to produce proof for yourself is already a change. Before, you needed outcomes to believe you were on the right path. Now, you are learning to remain without reassurance. That leaves you exposed. It brings to the surface the inner voices you once covered with busyness. And I am not afraid of those voices. I want you to hear them, so you may know what is truly leading you fear or trust. There are relationships I allow to remain still, not progressing, not because I have closed them, but because you need to see that you no longer depend on them to confirm your worth. There are opportunities I do not allow you to grasp yet, not because I am withholding, but because you are tying your identity too tightly to outcomes. If I were to give while you still bind yourself to success, you would live in fear of loss. I do not want what I give to become what makes you shrink. I want you free enough to receive without holding on in fear. You often ask me how much longer. I hear that question woven into your prayers. It is not loud, but it is persistent. You do not demand, you simply hope. Yet that hoping is draining you because you have attached it to a timeline. I do not answer you with a number, because you would turn that number into a target and strike yourself for not reaching it. Instead, I am answering by changing how you stand in the present. When you stand differently, time will no longer feel like a burden. It will become a natural rhythm of arrival. You do not notice that you compare yourself less than before. You do not notice that you explain yourself less than before. You do not notice that you no longer rush to fix everything the moment it feels unsettled. These things do not make you stand out, but they make you deep. And that depth is what I need for you to be able to hold what is coming. For what I give is not just a moment, it is a stretch of road. If you were prepared only for a moment, you would collapse along the way. I do not want you to love the idea of the future so much that you come to despise the present. I do not want you to live in promise while forgetting the place where I am standing with you now. When you dismiss today because it is not enough, you unknowingly say that my presence is not enough. I do not accuse you of this. I only want you to see it. For when you begin to honor today, not because it is easy, but because I am there, you will feel your heart settle. And in that settling, readiness continues to be formed quietly, without pressure, yet enduring. If you give me more time, not so that I may work, but so that you stop interfering, you will realize that I have never stood outside your process. I have been present in every delay, every turn, every day you thought was wasted. And one day, when you stand before what you once feared was too late, you will find that you are not trembling as you expected, not because you are stronger, but because you have learned to remain with me long enough to know that I do not arrive late. I arrive at the right moment when you are ready to step forward without breaking. There are moments when you begin to doubt that sense of something has changed. You ask yourself whether you are merely comforting yourself, or whether I am truly at work. You are accustomed to changes that can be pointed to with clear markers. So when transformation happens quietly, you fear you are deceiving yourself. But, beloved, what endures rarely makes noise. When metal is refined, the fire does not announce itself. When earth is compacted, the foundation does not applaud. And when your heart is being made ready, it does not need to prove itself with sound. It only needs to stand. You once thought I would remove you from the feeling of waiting by giving you what you asked for, but often I remove you from that feeling by changing the one who is waiting. Before, you waited with clenched fists and eyes fixed straight ahead. Now, you wait with open hands and eyes gentle enough to look around. You still hope, but you no longer strain. You still long, but you no longer hang your worth on the outcome. That difference is small, but it changes the entire way you walk. You do not realize that I am teaching you how to carry what is good without turning it into pressure. There are blessings that, if they come too early, become burdens. There are answers that, if they arrive while you still need control, will only cause you to cling more tightly. I do not want you to live by gripping what I give. I want you to live by trusting me enough to loosen your hold without losing what is given. Readiness is the ability to hold without squeezing, to step without panic, to receive without fearing that you will drop it. There are memories I allow to surface again in these days. You think they were finished, but they return not to make you fall. They return so you can look at them as a different person. Before, you looked at the past through self-blame. Now, you look through truth. You see where you pushed yourself too far. You see where you stayed silent out of fear. You see where you took detours. And this time, you do not need to defend yourself. You only need to recognize that I was there, even when you did not know how to name me. You ask why I do not give you a single breakthrough moment to end all waiting. But I do not want you addicted to breakthroughs. I want you to learn how to walk a long road. Great moments are beautiful, but they are not enough to keep you standing in ordinary days. What I am building in you is a foundation that can bear consistency, a foundation that does not collapse without encouragement, that does not shake when no one is watching. This foundation does not make you stand out, but it makes you steady. There are times you notice that you no longer need to explain yourself much to me. You stop listing merits and reasons. You stop negotiating. You simply come and remain. This does not make you passive, it makes you real. I do not need you to prove that you deserve what I have promised. I need you to be real enough not to damage it when it comes. Truth does not require a stage, it requires space. You once feared that if you stopped pushing yourself, you would fall behind. But you are beginning to see that it was the pushing that threw you out of rhythm. My rhythm does not shove, it leads. It does not rush, it holds. When you move within that rhythm, you no longer need to watch the clock to feel safe. You know you are in the right place not because you see the destination, but because you see me. And that seeing is enough to keep you moving without breaking. If today you still have not seen what you hope for, I do not fault you for feeling sad. I only ask that you not turn that sadness into evidence that I have forgotten you. I am very near enough to touch the corners you keep hidden. And I am touching them not to push you forward, but to help you stand a little more firmly. Some things, when they arrive, require steadiness more than speed. And when you can stand in that way, you will realize that waiting is no longer an empty space. It has become part of the readiness growing within you. There are days when you open the scriptures and then close them again, not because you do not believe, but because you fear landing on a verse that will make your heart ache more. You know well the passages about waiting, patience, timing. You know Abraham waited for a son until his hair turned white. You know Joseph was imprisoned for years before his name was spoken again. You know David was anointed early but hid in caves. You know all of this, yet knowing does not make you less tired. Knowing does not stop the question, what about me? And I do not fault you for that question. I only want you to look more closely at what you have been reading too quickly. Abraham did not wait in emptiness. He waited through mornings of pitching tents, through days of leading livestock to water, through conversations without clear answers. Joseph was not prepared by a throne, but by repetitive days in prison, where he learned not to grow bitter when forgotten. David did not become king on the day he was anointed, but through dark nights when he learned not to kill Saul even when he had the chance. You read these stories and see the outcome, but I look at the days in between. It was in those in-between days that their inner lives were softened, not to weaken them, but to make them strong enough to carry what was coming. There are evenings when you stand in the kitchen. The water boils and then cools, and you still do not know what to make for tomorrow. There are messages you draft and delete. There are emails you open without the strength to answer. You call these moments wasted time, but it is precisely in these small gaps that I am working. When you have nothing to boast about, you begin to look honestly at yourself. When you have no progress to report, you learn to remain without performing. When there is no recognition, you discover that you are still standing. These discoveries are not written as testimonies, but they are foundations. You remember the story of Elijah when he collapsed beneath the broom tree. He did not ask for power. He wanted to die. I did not rebuke him for that weakness. I did not preach him a long sermon. I fed him, let him sleep, and then told him to go on in small stages. You think readiness must come with passion, but often, readiness begins with your willingness to eat, to sleep, to stop despising yourself in exhaustion. I do not call you forward through depletion. I call you through life restored by very ordinary means. There are days you feel like Israel in the wilderness, no longer in Egypt, but not yet in the promised land. You have no old place to return to, and no clear view of the new one. You hate the middle. You want either to go back or to arrive. But the middle is where I teach you something you have not yet learned fully: how to live without relying on stored reserves. Each day they gathered manna only for that day. When they hoarded out of fear for tomorrow, the manna spoiled. So it is with you. When you try to carry tomorrow with today's strength, your heart begins to rot with anxiety. I do not show you far ahead so that you will stay close to me. You may not have noticed, but in these days you have said when less often and begun asking, "Who am I becoming?" Before, your questions were about timing. Now they are slowly shifting toward character. That is not a step backward, it is a deeper step. When you are obsessed with milestones, you will do anything to reach them. But when you care about who you are becoming, you allow me to set the rhythm. That rhythm is slower, but it does not tear you apart. You remember the woman with the issue of blood. She did not come with a long-term plan. She had strength for only one step to touch. She had spent all she had. She was exhausted. She was excluded. Her moment of readiness was not when she was strong, but when she stopped pretending that she was fine. You think readiness must come when you are strong, but often, it comes when you are real enough to stop hiding. When you stop performing the role of being ready, you begin to be truly ready. There are mornings when you put on your shoes without knowing where you are going. You only know that you need to leave the house. You take a few steps, breathe, watch sunlight strike the pavement. You do not call that progress, but I call it learning how to walk without a map. Abraham set out without knowing his destination. What held him was not the destination, but me. You are learning the same thing, not through grand decisions, but through very small steps that no one sees. I am not telling you to stop hoping. I am separating hope from panic. I am not asking you to give up what you are asking for. I am making you spacious enough to receive it without distorting it. When you stop forcing, your heart has room. When your heart has room, what I give can settle. And when it settles, you will not need to run to keep it. You will walk not because you fear being late, but because you have been made ready in days that are very ordinary. very slow, very real, where I have never left you. There are moments when you realize you are no longer as angry as you once were when things were delayed. Not because you suddenly understand, but because you no longer have the strength to rebel against reality. You call this giving up, but I call it ceasing resistance. When you stop resisting, you begin to hear what was once drowned out by protest. You hear your own breathing. You hear my footsteps very near, and you realize that I was never absent in the days you thought you had been left behind. You once thought that if I truly cared, I would have shown you a clearer sign, but you forgot that I rarely confirm things in the way you expect. When Elijah waited for me on the mountain, I was not in the strong wind, not in the earthquake, not in the fire. I was in the gentle whisper. You have grown accustomed to looking for me in large movements, so you have missed me in small ones. I am teaching you a new way of listening, not through tension, but through gentle attentiveness. When you learn to listen this way, I will not need to shout for you to believe. There are days when you look back at past decisions and wonder whether today would be different if you had chosen another way. You turn over possibilities again and again, as if thought could still revise the past. I do not blame you for these questions, but I do not want you living in assumptions. Joseph might have avoided prison if he had not spoken his dreams, yet prison was where he learned not to despair when forgotten. If I were to erase the turns, you would lose the layers of strength you now carry. I do not use mistakes to punish you. I use them to train you to stand firm when things do not go as you hoped. You begin to notice that in these days, you no longer seek people to validate every emotion. You still need to share, but you no longer panic when there is no immediate response. Before, the silence of others made you doubt yourself. Now, you can remain in silence without erasing your worth. That does not come from being stronger. It comes from having stayed long enough in my presence to know that I do not withdraw when there is no reply. There are afternoons when you walk through a small park, watch children playing, and feel your heart soften without needing a reason. You do not call that sacred, but I know it is a sign. When your soul stops bracing itself, it begins to receive life in simple places. I do not meet you only in prayer rooms. I meet you while you wash your hands, while you wait at a red light, while you sit quietly without needing to fill the space. Readiness is not a constant spiritual intensity. It is the ability to remain with me in very ordinary moments. You once feared that if you stopped pushing yourself, everything would stall. But you are beginning to see the opposite when you stop pushing. Something inside you begins to move, not toward the destination, but toward truth, and that truth slows you in a way that does not suffocate you. When you no longer need to prove that you are on the right path, you begin to walk rightly without needing proof. It is a strange freedom, not exhilarating, but steady. I do not promise that tomorrow everything will be clear. I promise that when tomorrow comes, you will not be standing as you once did. You will stand with a different center. You will stand without needing to run to keep up. You will stand without needing to grip tightly to hold on. And when what you are hoping for arrives, whether an opportunity, a relationship, or a new door, you will realize that you are not trembling as much as you once feared. Not because you waited long enough, but because during that time, you were made ready in ways you could not have done for yourself. If today you still cannot name where you are, I am not rushing you to label it. Some seasons do not need names. They only need you to stay. I am there with you, not ahead to push, not behind to pull. I am beside you. And when you grow accustomed to walking beside me, you will understand that what you call slow has not taken anything away. It has preserved you so that when the time opens, you step in without breaking, without panicking, without losing yourself. There are moments when you realize you no longer question me as much as before, not because you have answers, but because the questions no longer claw at you. You still have not seen what you are hoping for, Yet the absence no longer suffocates you. Before, every gap felt like an accusation. Now, the gap becomes ground you can stand on. You do not call this faith. You only know that you are still standing. And I know that in this still standing, you have already come a long way. You once believed that if you were truly ready, you would feel certain. But I am showing you something different. Readiness does not always come with reassurance. It comes with honesty, honesty about your rhythm, honesty about your limits, honesty about no longer wanting to run just to prove you are not failing. When you stop running out of fear, you begin to walk out of trust. And that difference is not loud, but it redirects the entire journey. There are evenings when you sit alone and realize you no longer need to turn on more noise to cover the silence. You leave the lamp warm, the room quiet, and allow the day to close without a conclusion. You do not realize that moments like these are where I restore you. Elijah was not healed through long explanations. He was healed through a simple meal and sleep. You are the same. There are things that do not need to be understood in order to be healed. They only need to be set down long enough. You are beginning to see that I am not only preparing you for what you asked for, but also for what you have not yet dared to ask. If I were to give you everything at the moment you wanted it, you would live only within the limits of what you dared to imagine. But I am widening your heart through slow days, so that when something greater arrives, you will not shrink back in fear. Readiness is not only having enough strength to receive, it is having enough breadth not to refuse, simply because you have grown accustomed to smallness. Old memories return in these days, but they no longer carry the same weight. You find that you can look at them without turning away. You no longer need to rewrite the story to protect yourself. You simply look and acknowledge there were stretches where you did not know how to go on. And I was there. David did not become a man after my own heart because he was strong. He became a man after my own heart because he knew how to return when he had wandered. You are learning this not through great failures, but through very small moments when you choose to return rather than to prove yourself. You once thought I was holding you back because you were not good enough. But I am showing you that I am holding you because you are learning not to use competence as the condition for being loved. When you stop tying your worth to arriving on time, you begin to see that I loved you before you ever started running. That love does not demand that you accelerate. It steadies you when you are tired. And in being steadied, you learn how to move without pushing yourself into collapse. There are days when you are still sad. I do not take that sadness away immediately. I simply sit with you in it. Joseph had days like this in prison days with no new promise, no new dream, only repetition. Yet it was in that repetition that he learned how to keep his heart from hardening. When you keep your heart soft in repetitive days, you are being made ready for days of change. You do not need to force yourself to believe that everything is fine. I do not need strained optimism. I need your staying. Staying with me when you cannot see the way. Staying when you no longer want to explain. Staying when you have nothing to show. When you stay like this, you are doing the hardest thing, harder than running, harder than striving, harder than proving. You are trusting without needing a feeling to accompany it. And then there will be a day quiet, without fanfare, when you realize you are standing before an open door. You may not recognize it at first as what you have been waiting for. You will only know that this time, you do not have to force yourself to step. You step because the inner rhythm has aligned. You step without fear of leaving yourself behind. And in that moment, you will understand what I said from the beginning. You were not late. I was waiting for you to be ready. In the days that follow, you may be surprised that you no longer long for a dramatic breakthrough the way you once did. Not because you have stopped hoping, but because your hope has changed shape. Before, you hoped for a day when everything would light up so you would know you had arrived. Now, you hope simply not to return to old ways. You hope not to lose the softness formed in slow days. You hope not to trade this steadiness for a burst of speed. And I smile. because that hope tells me you are beginning to understand what I am doing. You do not realize that as you urge yourself less, you hear me more clearly, not because I speak louder, but because the noise within you has quieted. Before, every decision had to win an argument. Now, some choices arrive gently, as if they have been waiting. You no longer need to persuade yourself. You only need to yield to what is right. That yielding does not make you passive, it makes you precise. There are mornings when you read a very familiar verse of Scripture, and this time it does not ask you to do more. It simply stands there, like a marker reminding you that I do not change. Be still, and know that I am God. You once read this as a command. Now you read it as a place of rest. When you are still, not because you have nothing to do, but because you choose to trust, you begin to know, not through reasoning, but through a calm that needs no explanation. You find yourself making fewer promises to the distant future. You no longer need to say someday to soothe the present. You learn to complete the small task before you without turning it into a stepping stone toward something bigger. When you wash dishes, you wash them. When you answer a difficult message, you answer it. When you rest, you rest. These things do not make you impressive, but they make you upright. And that uprightness is part of readiness, the ability to live fully in what is given without despising it. At times you think of David when he returned to Ziklag and found everything burned. He wept until he had no strength left. Then he asked me one very simple question: shall I pursue? I did not answer him with a sermon. I simply said, pursue. His readiness was not that he felt no pain, but that he asked before acting. You are learning to ask in this way, not to avoid responsibility, but to avoid driving yourself into pursuits you were never called to chase. You are beginning to see that I am not holding you back so you will stand alone. I am teaching you how to walk with me. When you walk with me, you do not need to see far in order to feel secure. You only need enough light for the next step. Abraham did not have a map for his whole life. He had enough light for what was before him, and that light was enough to keep him from stepping into darkness. There are days when you still feel slow. I do not deny that feeling. I only want you to stop turning it into a verdict. Slowness is not the same as missing out when you are in my hands. There are things that, if you arrive too early, you would carry with shallowness. There are things that, if you arrive later by your measure, you will carry with depth by mine. I choose depth for you, even when you do not always like its pace. You do not need to defend this waiting to anyone. You do not need to explain that you are not lazy, not incapable, not falling behind. I know, and when I know, you do not need further confirmation. There are seasons that are not understood while you are in them. They are understood only after you have passed through. I do not promise applause while you wait. I promise that you will stand firm when it matters. There will be days when you do the same things as yesterday, but your heart is different. You no longer count how long it has been. You no longer measure yourself against others. You only know that today you did not lose yourself. And I call that progress, a progress that does not need to be proven, yet is real enough to carry you far. When you step into what is new, and you will carry the memory of these slow days as a gift. They will remind you to pause when needed. They will keep you from trading truth for speed. They will remind you that what is good does not need to be seized. And in moments when you forget, I will remind you again, very gently, as I have done throughout this entire stretch. I am not saying that you will never hurry again. I am saying that when you do hurry, you will know how to return. I am not saying that you will never fear being late. I am saying that fear will no longer drive you. For now you have learned something essential: timing is not your enemy. Timing is the instrument I use to love you long enough, deeply enough, until you are able to step forward without breaking. There is something you did not notice at first when you stop asking when. You begin to ask, how am I standing? That question does not make you restless, it makes you awake. You begin to notice how you speak to others and how you speak to yourself. You find yourself less harsh, less inclined to drive yourself away. Before, whenever you slowed down, you used heavy words to whip yourself forward. Now you are learning to stand beside yourself without the lash. I am not doing this to weaken you. I am doing it so you will stop wounding yourself in the name of progress. There are afternoons when you eat a very simple meal, not because you lack options, but because you do not need much to feel that it is enough. You sit quietly for a few minutes before standing up. No one sees that moment. But I do. When Esau sold his birthright for a bowl of stew, it was not only a story about appetite, it was a story about a man who could not endure waiting. You are learning the opposite to endure the feeling of not yet without selling what is deeper. Readiness grows out of the moments when you choose enough, rather than fast. You begin to notice that some invitations no longer attract you as they once did, not because they are wrong, but because they are out of rhythm. Before, you would accept so as not to be left behind. Now you can decline without long explanations. You remember that Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness before returning to Egypt. Once, he acted too early and took a life. The next time, he moved only when I called. The distance between those two steps was not time, it was readiness. You, too, are learning to distinguish between being driven and being called. There are days when you remember old dreams, yet they no longer make you frantic. You see them like seeds resting beneath the soil. You know that if you dig them up every day to check, they will die. A farmer does not stand over the field shouting at the seed. He waters. He waits. He trusts the season. I am teaching you to live this way, to do your part, and then to leave the rest quietly in my hands. This does not make you passive, it places you rightly. At times you hear others speak of their rapid progress, and you feel a brief tightening in your chest. You do not deny the feeling, you simply do not let it rule you. You remember how Peter looked at the wind while walking on water and began to sink. The wind was not new, it had been there all along. What changed was his gaze. You do not need the wind to disappear in order to walk. You need only to know where to look. When your eyes remain in the right place, you can step even when conditions do not change. There are evenings when you open your calendar and no longer see it as a sentence. It is simply days, some full, some open. You no longer assign your worth based on how the calendar looks. Before, you needed it to be full in order to feel meaningful. Now you can leave space without feeling useless. That space is not failure, it is room for me to place what is necessary when the time comes. You do not know exactly when what you are waiting for will appear. I am not asking you to know. I want you to know this instead when it does come. You will not have to become someone else to carry it. You will not need to abandon the gentleness you have learned in order to bear new responsibility. You will carry both responsibility and softness at the same time. That is what I am preparing, not a faster person, but a person steady enough to walk far. And if there comes a day when you feel impatient again, I do not withdraw what I have spoken. I will remind you gently. As I always do, look at how you are standing, not how far you have gone. Remember that I am not waiting at the end of the road for you to arrive on time. I am walking with you in every step. And when you walk this way, not running, not avoiding, not whipping yourself, you will realize that what I promised is not threatened by your pace. It is protected by me. There is an evening when you realize you no longer need to tally the day like a scorecard. You do not ask how much you accomplished or how many steps you advanced. You simply sit down, take off your shoes, and let your feet rest. You do not call this spiritual, but I know it as the sign of a soul that has stopped judging itself every day. When Judas Maccabeus fought, he knew that some battles are not won by numbers or strength. Some battles require only standing firm until morning comes. You are learning to stand this way, not winning immediately, but not abandoning your place. You begin to see more clearly the moments when you are tempted to rush out of fear of being forgotten. You recognize where that feeling comes from times when you had to manage alone, from moments when no one waited for you. I do not fault you for that reflex. I am teaching you that now. You no longer have to save yourself. When you sense yourself about to rush, you pause for a breath. You do not dramatize it. You ask quietly, "Am I running?" That question is enough to bring you back to rhythm. There are times when you reopen old notes, old plans you once wrote with absolute certainty. You do not tear them up. You smile gently, because you see clearly who you were then, zealous, but tense. I do not despise that version of you. I used it to bring you here, but I do not want you to carry that tension into what comes next. What I am preparing requires clarity, not strain. You remember the story of Martha and Mary. Martha did nothing wrong by being busy, but what she lacked was the ability to stop when I was present. You are the same. You have done many right things. You simply had not yet learned how to stop. Now you are learning not through teaching, but through experience. You are learning that stopping does not make me leave. Stopping makes me more visible. There are days when you do less, and yet you are less exhausted. Before, you lived as though you had to maintain a high pace to avoid falling behind. Now you live at a pace that is enough to keep you from breaking. This rhythm does not make you stand out, but it allows you to remain whole. When the people of Israel rebuilt the wall, they built while keeping watch. Not everyone worked quickly, but each did their part. You are doing your part as well, the part of guarding your heart. You no longer look for a great confirmation from me. You do not need me to say that you have arrived. You only need to know that today, you did not leave me behind. When you can keep that, you feel lighter, not because everything is resolved, but because you are no longer dragging the fear of being late into every step. You begin to trust that if I have brought you this far, I will not abandon you halfway. That trust is not loud. It rests quietly, but it is firm. There are mornings when you wake up and no longer feel rushed, not because there is nothing to do, but because you no longer treat work as the measure of your worth. You act because it needs to be done, not because you need to prove something. When Peter was restored by the shore, I did not remind him of his failure. I asked him about love. I did not bring him back through obligation, but through relationship. You are being brought back in the same way, not by pressure, but by nearness. You do not know exactly where you are on the journey, and I do not ask you to know. I only ask you to keep walking with me, not running to catch up, not standing still to hide. Walk. When you walk this way, you will not need to look at the clock to feel secure. You will realize that each small step is carrying you to the right place, not quickly, but sufficiently. And when what is new opens, you will not feel behind. You will know you have been held long enough, carefully enough to be ready to continue without breaking. There are moments when you suddenly realize you have stopped counting how many times I have not answered. You no longer keep records of suspended prayers. You do not calculate months and years in your mind. You are not trying to forget. You have simply stopped living by counting. Before, every time you counted, you pushed yourself farther from me. Now, by no longer counting, you are closer, not because you want less, but because you desire without tearing yourself apart. You begin to see that readiness does not erase longing. It purifies longing. It cleanses it of urgency, cleanses it of the need to use what I give to patch old wounds. You no longer need an outcome to prove that these slow days matter. You allow meaning to reveal itself in how you face others, in how you remain with unfinished work without running away, in how you allow yourself not to know and still trust. There are afternoons when you sit before a small decision and realize you are no longer panicking. You do not need to open 10 options to reassure yourself. You do not need to ask 5 people to avoid responsibility. You pause for a moment, listen, and then do what is right. You remember when Samuel was young and heard a voice he did not recognize. He only needed to learn how to respond, speak. Your readiness is being formed in the same way, not through certainty, but through response. You are no longer afraid of repetitive days. Before, repetition meant stagnation. Now, repetition is where you practice faithfulness. Repetitive days teach you to keep your heart steady when there is no encouragement. They teach you to care for small things when no one is watching. They teach you that steadiness does not need to be new every day. When the people of Israel walked around Jericho, they walked many days without seeing the walls crack. Yet every circuit mattered. You are walking such circuits now, not useless, not forgotten. There are times when you realize you have stopped speaking harshly to yourself. You no longer call slowness laziness, rest weakness, or delay failure. The language you use toward yourself has changed, and when language changes, direction follows. I do not need you to speak grand words. I need you to speak true ones. When you stop using words as a whip, you allow me to use words as support. You remember the parable of the sower. Some seeds fell on the path, some on rocky ground, some among thorns, and some into good soil. Good soil is not fast soil. It is deep soil. It holds the seed long enough for roots to go down. You are being formed into such soil, not flashy, not hurried, but deep. When the season comes, you will not need to call for fruit. It will appear on its own. There are days when you still feel not enough. I do not deny that feeling. I only remind you that not yet enough is not never. Not enough is a condition I use to keep working. When you accept not yet without self-contempt, you open space for me. And I work very well in spaces that are not forced to be perfect. You are beginning to understand that I am not keeping you here to teach you endurance. I am keeping you here to teach you trust. Trust is not knowing in advance. Trust is staying when you do not yet see. Trust is doing today's portion without demanding tomorrow's. Trust is daring to believe that if I have begun the work, I will complete it not according to your timeline, but according to the wisdom I know you need. And when you look back on this stretch, not today, but another day, you will not remember every waiting hour. You will remember one thing clearly: you did not break. You did not lose yourself. You learned how to walk without running. And in that, you will realize that what I did was not make you arrive on time. I made you ready. There is a moment when you realize you have stopped waiting for a dramatic call. Before, you thought I would shatter the silence with an unmistakable sign, a touch strong enough to silence every doubt. But now you begin to see that I have been speaking all along, just not in the way you expected. I spoke through the fact that you no longer panic when things slow down. I spoke through the fact that you no longer need to prove yourself on unseen days. I spoke through the fact that you can remain with what is unfinished without running away. These things are not loud, but they are voices. You remember Joshua standing at the edge of the Jordan. The water had not parted. The path was not visible. There was only a simple word: step in. The water parted only when the foot touched it. You are the same. You want to see the way before you step. I am teaching you to step before you see. Not to test you, but because there are paths that appear only under the weight of someone who is ready to stand without guarantees. That readiness does not come from certainty. It comes from having remained with me long enough to dare to place your foot down. There are afternoons when you sit alone and sense two voices within you. One says, you are missing the rhythm, that if you do not move faster, you will be left behind. The other does not argue. It simply reminds you that I have never abandoned you. Before, the voice of fear always won because it spoke louder. Now, you are beginning to realize that my voice does not need to win by volume. It wins by staying. And when you choose to listen to it, you do not need to silence the other voice. It weakens on its own. You no longer ask me to open every door. You begin to ask me to keep you steady when a door opens. This change is small, but it marks a threshold. When you stop treating what comes as a reward for having waited long enough, you stop forcing me to prove myself. You begin to trust that if I open a door, you will be enough to step through it without losing yourself. And that trust does not make you restless. It makes you calm in a way that needs no explanation. You start to notice very ordinary details in your days. The way you tie your shoes is no longer rushed. The way you listen to someone else no longer waits for your turn to speak. The way you finish a small task no longer comes with self-reproach. These changes are not part of any grand plan, but they are signs of an inner rhythm being realigned. I do not build readiness through a series of large decisions. I build it through small things done fully. You once feared that if you stopped pushing yourself, you would be stuck forever. But now you are beginning to see something else. It was the pushing that kept you stuck. When you let me lead, movement becomes steady, not fast, but not frozen either. Like the people of Israel walking under the pillar of cloud, they did not know the route. They followed presence. When the cloud stopped, they stopped. When it moved, they moved. That rhythm did not lead them astray. It held them. There are moments when you sense yourself standing very near a threshold you have not yet named. You do not know whether it is a beginning or an ending. You only know that you no longer want to return to the old way. The urge to run in order to arrive no longer attracts you. The false comfort of delay can no longer hide you. You stand there unhurried, unavoiding. And I know this is the moment when waiting has completed its work. You do not need more time to become worthy. You need the right moment to realize that you have already been prepared, not because you did enough, but because you have been remade. As you stand at this threshold, I do not ask whether you are afraid. I ask whether you are willing to step when I call, even when you cannot yet see the whole picture. And in that very thin silence, where there is little left to say, something becomes clear. You are not late. You are standing exactly where I want you. At the moment you can step without breaking. There is a very fine tension in these days that you do not know how to name. It is no longer sharp anxiety, but it is not yet full peace. It is like the moment before dawn touches the edge of the sky, not light yet, but no longer dark. You remain there longer than you expected. Before, this in-between would have made you impatient. Now, you realize you no longer need to force your way through it. You stay, and that staying no longer frightens you. I see this more clearly than you do. You remember when the people stood before the Red Sea, water ahead, pursuing armies behind, wilderness on both sides. There was no good option, only the option that was called. I did not part the sea first so they could feel safe and then step forward. I waited until they stood still long enough not to turn back. You are standing in a similar place now, not pressed in, but held in place so you do not turn the wrong way out of panic. Readiness is sometimes not having a path, but no longer having an old way back. Some things within you have settled without your noticing at first. You no longer feel the need to constantly check where you are. You no longer replay the question, "Is this right?" over and over in your mind. You are still careful, but you are no longer trembling. This is not because you have seen the outcome. It is because you have stopped anchoring your identity to outcomes. When identity releases pressure, your body follows, your shoulders loosen, your breath deepens, sleep comes more easily. These signs are not spiritual in the way you once expected, but they tell the truth. You begin to understand that I did not lead you here so you would stand forever. I led you here so you would know how to stand when standing is required. When you can stand like this, stepping forward no longer feels like a gamble. It becomes a natural continuation. You do not need to make noise to call it faith. Faith is now quiet, but solid. It does not demand guarantees, yet it is not blind. It knows who is leading. There are times when you find yourself wanting to say very little to me, not because you are distant, but because you are close. Long explanations are no longer necessary. You only need to be here. I do not read that silence as indifference. I read it as trust that has matured. When two people have been together long enough, they do not need constant words to prove relationship. You and I are in such a rhythm now, unshowy, but real. You no longer try to make today significant. You complete it, and that completeness frees the day from needing to be special in order to matter. Before, you lived for other days. Now, you live in this one. That shift is the mark of someone who has stopped fleeing the present by clinging to the future. When you stop running, you begin to see that I have been here all along. I know you sense that something is about to open, even if you have not yet dared to name it. I am not rushing you into it, nor am I leaving you standing here forever. I am waiting for the moment when you can step forward without carrying fear of being late as baggage. That moment does not come when fear disappears, but when fear no longer drives you, and I see that happening not loudly, not suddenly, but irreversibly. When that moment comes, you will not need to rehearse the whole journey to convince yourself. You will know one thing with clarity: this step does not take you away from me, it carries you with me. And in that very quiet certainty, you will understand what I have been saying throughout this long stretch. Waiting did not make you late. It brought you to the right place, at the right time, with an inner life steady enough to step without breaking. There is something you will only realize when you stand right before the final step of this season. I did not lead you in circles to test you. I led you around to return you to yourself. Before, you moved forward while leaving parts of yourself behind: your softness, your truth, your rest. You thought that was the price of arriving in time. But I do not need you to arrive by losing yourself. I want you to arrive whole. And these slow days have accomplished what speed never could. They kept you long enough that you no longer have to divide yourself in order to survive. You remember when Moses stood before the burning bush that was not consumed. I did not tell him to run. I told him to remove his sandals. Before stepping into his calling, he learned how to stand on holy ground without carrying the dust of old roads. So it is with you. I am asking you to lay down habits that once helped you survive, but no longer help you live rightly. These slow days are the moments of removing your sandals, not to weaken you, but to let you touch the ground as it truly is. And when you touch the ground for real, the steps ahead are no longer a performance. They become quiet obedience. There is a very thin moment when all the old voices fall silent at once, not because they have been crushed, but because they no longer have authority. You stand there without needing to persuade yourself, without forcing emotion. You simply know that this step is not your final effort, but your response. I do not pull you across that threshold. I do not push. I call. And when you respond, you are surprised to find that your body does not resist. Your heart does not race ahead. Your mind does not demand control. You step, and the step fits. I do not promise that everything will be easy from here. I promise that from here on, you will no longer have to run to keep up. When hardship comes, you will stand. When ease comes, you will receive without gripping. When others move faster, you will not condemn yourself. When you slow down, you will not fear being forgotten, for you have learned something that cannot be taken away. I do not measure you by pace. I hold you by presence. You will carry the memory of these days as a compass. When you begin to brace yourself, that memory will remind you to stop. When you begin to compare, it will remind you to look again at the one who led you. When you begin to doubt, it will remind you that there was a stretch where I held you long enough that you did not break, and I will not change the way I love you in the stretch ahead. You will not need to return here often, but whenever you do, you will know how to return to this rhythm. And if you ask me now what you should do next, I will not hand you a long list. I will say it simply: walk in what is right before you, without running, without avoiding. Keep what I have softened within you. Speak truth when you do not yet know. Rest when you are tired without shaming yourself. Do the small work fully, without despising it. These things do not create noise, but they keep you in truth, the place where everything I give can remain at rest. If you have been touched in this season, do not rush to preserve it with grand promises. One small mark is enough. A whisper that is fully honest. A decision to stop running. A choice to remain in today. If someone comes to mind who is condemning themselves for being slow, send this to them as a gentle touch, not to fix them, but to let them know they are not alone. And if you fear forgetting, keep this as a reminder for yourself. I am not waiting for you to be perfect. I am waiting for you to be ready. Now, as you stand at this threshold, I do not say, hurry up. I say, it is all right. Not because you have done enough, but because you have been made enough. Not because you arrived on time, but because you learned how to arrive without breaking. And when you step, and you will know this clearly. Without anyone needing to confirm it, you are not late. I waited for you to be ready, and I am here, still holding you. As you move forward, no longer afraid of being late, may the word of the Lord continually remind you to live each day in His faith and love. Please subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss the sacred and meaningful messages God desires to share. May God bless you. Amen.